Today, I sit down with Keith Ferrazzi, who's the best-selling author of great books like Never Eat Alone. He's also an award-winning speaker, investor, philanthropist, and he's also an executive coach. So we talk so much about his concept around radical adaptability and how you can be on the cutting edge of transforming your company, your organization, or your team to thrive moving forward. You are going to love this conversation with Keith Ferrazzi.
Got you there with Sean Delaney.
Keith, welcome to What Got You There. How are you doing today?
Sean, I'm excited about this. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's great to see you. I want to dive in a bit of your backstory first, and I would love to know, why is it so essential, or what can you get? What is the benefit of showing 30 minutes early to the golf course?
Wow, you really taking me back. So, I grew up a poor kid in Pittsburgh in the 70s when the steel industry was crashing. My old man was an unemployed steel worker. My mom was a cleaning lady. And I had to go work at the local country club because my $20 that I made at that country club, schlepping golf clubs around all day, was exactly the same amount of money my mom was working, cleaning houses. So that was meaningful cash to the house. And I remember my dad used to say to me, "Keith, show up at the golf course a half an hour early." I'm like, "Pops, there's nobody there. Like, there's no caddies, there's no golfers. It's useless." And he would say it again, "Show up at the golf course half an hour early." When he would repeat, I used to call that immigrant Tourette's. He'd just say shit that I was like, I don't understand it, but I'm not going to get him off of it. So fine, I show up at the golf course and I'm walking around, I'm bored. I'm walking around the golf course a little bit. And I would notice where the pins were placed, like, front of the back of the greens. I'd see how the greens were cut, if they were cut that morning. So I knew how to put. So it was very interesting that there was this woman named Mrs. Poland. You probably didn't expect all of this, but there was this woman, Mrs. Poland, who was the best woman golfer at the country club. And as we were walking around, she was taking like conversational, personal interest in me. Tell me what's up with you? What do you want to do with your life, etc. I was so shy and didn't feel like rich people. Rich people to me, their kids teased me at school for, not having the right kind of clothes and stuff. So I just wanted to keep my head down and get a good job done and get my $20. But what was very interesting about Mrs. Poland is she made a real investment in me because by showing up at the golf course a half an hour early, I actually was a better caddy. I had insight and information that other kids didn't have about, the pins placement and other things, but also I had a hustle because I needed that $20. And her investment in me led her to be more curious in me. And that was really, that was a tipping point of my life because Mrs. Poland ultimately said, "Keith, I'm serious. Tell me what you want to do with your life." I said, "Well, my dad says if I study real hard, I work real hard, I could do anything. I could be president of the United States." Now, I really did want to be president of the United States. That's what immigrant kids, are told by their parents. And what was really powerful about that was within a week, she had the local congressman in her foursome, a guy named Congressman Murtha. And she had told this guy that. And he took me under his wing. And he told me I should get involved in speech and debate in high school. He told me that if I needed to study or needed access to his congressional library, that I'm happy to come up to his office and work out of there. And it was a game changer for me. I ended up going on and winning the United States National Speech and Debate Tournament, which was my ticket into Yale University. And all of that because I showed up at the golf course a half an hour early. Now, what we have to recognize is that the doors of opportunity are opened by others. Doors of opportunity are opened by others. And if you don't show up, and the reason Mrs. Poland did all that stuff for me, because I took 2 strokes off her golf score. People show up for you because you're deeply generous to them. And that's what showing up at the golf course a half an hour early means. So as you think about the people in your life that are critical to you, how are you showing up at the golf course a half of an hour early for them?
Keith, I love that story. One thing I'm really intrigued by is obviously those people have to open up the doors for you. So you have to be of service to them so that they even do that. But then you have to have the ability to see that, this door is being opened for me. Were you aware at that young age exactly what was going on in all this? Or were you just kind of, oh, this is a cool opportunity, let me take this?
I think I got lucky, and that's when So the new book research that we're here to talk about, we had 2,000 executives during the pandemic crowdsourcing the best practices for how do we lead organizations in a radically volatile world that we're in today. And one of the very first things I noticed is, how do you curate foresight? How do you look around corners? How do you see opportunity? How do you see risk? And there's a chapter in the book about this. And what I've really found was, I didn't see that at the time, but my dad helped me become aware that Mrs. Poland's invitation was a powerful one. Other caddies did when they heard me report the story when I came back. And what I want you to realize as a leader is, you do not have to have the foresight and the wisdom and the vision of a Steve Jobs. You have to crowdsource that through relationships and having a community around you. And you have to be open enough to hear it, humble enough to invite it, and at the same time, make sure that you curate the group so that you get the insight. So one of the things that I saw during the peak of the pandemic were executives who hosted monthly meetings where people came, as many people as they wanted, not just their directs team, but broader individuals. And executives would say, what risks are you seeing that we might not be seeing? What opportunities for growth are you seeing that we might not be seeing? Pushed buttons, sent people into Google, sent people into breakout rooms, open Google Docs, had the entire organization weighing in on risk and opportunity management. What a beautiful way to lead your life, by curating an inclusive group of individuals looking around corners. So no, I didn't get it when I was a kid by myself, but you don't have to do anything by yourself. That's what your team's for.
Yeah, I'm really just interested in that inclusive element, right? Like, to be a great leader, you have to empower those that are working with you. And I'm wondering, for people in those organizations where they don't feel even comfortable being able to speak up, is there anything you discovered during this pandemic that could just shed some light on both the leaders who are in those organizations and the people, just so they can even develop that ability to speak up and collaborate together?
There's an entire chapter on collaboration and inclusion. And one of the words that I had to create in order to describe what I was seeing in this research was a word called co-elevation. The teams that thrived not only had a commitment to winning, and in the beginning, not only had a commitment to survival, but they had a commitment to winning, and they had a commitment to each other. They had an aligned North Star. And then they said, we're committed to this, and we're committed to getting each other there. We're all going to cross over the finish line together. And that was so powerful. And by the way, Stanley McChrystal is a buddy of mine, and he's the one that often, help me first understand that, when he's like, the helicopter doesn't take off until every soldier's on, dead or alive. We don't leave anybody behind. And that's what you have to curate as a leader. It's, what I do for a living is my organization coaches executive teams. That's what we do, coach executive teams. And what I realized is that we need a new social contract. And it's the social contract that I saw existing in the teams that were thriving and surviving, and those that did not, which is this social contract where not only are you a great leader, but you've created a great team. And a great team isn't a group of individuals doing their jobs. It's a team that is committed to each other's success, and they're committed to coaching each other as well. So that social contract of co-elevation is the earmark of the tipping point between a mediocre team that has a great leader. A great set of individuals with a great leader is not a great team. A great team has to be focused on being a great team. And in sports, I'm sure you probably can think of some amazing examples of that. But some often in Europe, people talk about the Real Madrid team that was a group of successful individuals that had not gotten their shit together as a team, right? Jordan, they didn't start winning until he learned to pass the ball. And so that's the difference. And we need to be focusing on the team, not just the individuals.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those hidden variables, right? I mean, you might have the best team on paper, but if that team isn't going after the same vision, the same purpose, and gelling together, I mean, there's going to be dysfunction. There's no way about that. I'm so intrigued.
Well, again, let me just pause for this. There's, dysfunction is one thing. Of course, people try to stamp that out, but go to the level where the team owns each other's success, right? we have a diagnostic that we do for high performing teams. And some of the questions are things like, will we challenge each other in the room when it's risky to do so? Right? That's the kind of level that we're talking about here. Yeah. But anyway, go ahead.
No. Let's go there for a second, because I'm so intrigued. I mean, you've spent so many thousands and thousands of hours with a ton of different teams. When you first walk into the room, like, what's Keith's radar looking for? Like, what are some of the early questions you're asking just to catch up to speed with them?
Well, the first thing I'm looking for is candor. How much transparency? So before I walk into the room, I've talked to all members of the team. And I know, and I'm always interested in hearing when people say, well, this is confidential, right? I'm like, okay, great. I get it. And yes, it is. But why? Why? I mean, why is it confidential? If your information, we're tribal animals. Back in the day, if you were a member of a tribe and one of you heard something rustling in the bush, right, that could have been a danger to the tribe, you said something, right? But why is it in our many tribes of teams today that we have perspectives of risk, places where we think we're off the rails, places where we think we're falling behind? And what do? We whisper it behind each other's backs about each other. Bullshit, unacceptable, underperforming, low grade professional behavior. And that's part of what I do. Very early on, I'm the one that comes into the team. I'm like, you know what? Look at where you are. I'm just going to state, I know, because I've interviewed all of you, that you're not telling each other the truth. Now you tell me, is that high grade or low grade professional behavior? It's your behavior. You define it. Put a label on it. High grade or low grade. And, usually that's like, oh, fuck. That's like the first introduction to Keith Ferrazzi.
Yeah, I'm sure that's a wake-up call for a lot of people. What I'm so intrigued by even is not only have you developed a research institute. I mean, you mentioned interviewing 2,000 leaders during this pandemic to be able to write this latest book. How the hell do you go from a poor son of a steelworker in Pittsburgh, youngest chief marketing officer in the Fortune 500, to everything you've done with your books, the research institute, and coaching? Like, looking back, I mean, could you have foreseen that happening? Was there this belief then, or was this completely unseen?
Remember, I was the kid that thought he was going to be president of the United States.
There we go.
I'm unfortunately a gross underachiever. And the reality is that, I don't think I'll ever be satisfied with the footprint that I put on the planet. I feel like we're all put on this planet as gifts. And our job is to maximize that gift in service of the world, in service of others around us. And whether that doesn't mean that I don't deeply respect the contribution of the single mom who's just focused on raising that child. I mean, that is beautiful. And that's a personal commitment for me. I want to make the biggest ripple effect that I possibly can. This morning I was on the phone with 30 unicorns and soonicorns, meaning soon to become unicorns, in Latin America, right? I mean, I was coaching that group of executives in a roundtable format of 30, and we were making a commitment to go on a journey to transform what human capital looks like in Latin America. My dear friend Tony Hsieh passed away during the pandemic in a tragic death. If anybody knows of Tony Hsieh from Zappos, and I started in my foundation, I started the Tony Hsieh Award, recognizing, finding, and rewarding leaders who want to crack the code of what human capital elevation is in organizations, like Tony was trying to do. So I don't know, I'm just voracious, and I'll never stop. And I'm working on this in my own therapy and coaching, but I'll probably never be satisfied.
Talking about that voracious nature, it's funny, like one of the key things you hit on in the book is around radical adaptability. And we're going to hit on that around the organization. But you seem to me like that's been a through line throughout your career, how radically adaptable you've been. I mean, is that something you had even back when you were on the golf course, or is that something you cultivated over time?
And it's interesting. We start this book, Competing in the New World of Work. And I know we've got in the show notes, you can go and get it at radicallyadapt.com. Got a video series for you, etc. I love the way we start the book. It starts at Burning Man. And so I'm studying the the high performing teams during the pandemic. And we crowdsourced the best practices of these teams into one codified research body that Harvard says is the most impressive body of research they've seen come out of the pandemic, and the number one pick of a book coming out of the pandemic. And I'm a burner. I've been a Burning Man for many, many years, 16 years. And I realized I'm not going to go to Burning Man that year, 2020. And I was like, wow. And I just started thinking about it, and I realized the correlation. What happens at Burning Man? What happens when you take 60,000 people and put them in the desert in some of the scorching heat of the day and some of the lowest freezing cold of the night with no resources or water, right? And I've got plenty of friends who've done this. I've never had the courage, where they show up at Burning Man with nothing but a ticket and the clothes in the back. And by the time they are in the middle of Burning Man, they've got a tent, they've got resources, they've got friends, they've got extra clothes, they've got water, they've got food. Because what happens is they say the playa will provide. That's the desert. But the playa doesn't provide, the community does. In crisis, some of what happens is we bond together as a community. We bond together like we've never bonded before, to survive and to create and to grow. And that's what happened during the pandemic for those who allowed it to occur. Some people got fractured and frustrated and fearful, and others came together as a tribe to survive and thrive. And I even created that word co-elevation, right? That sense of going higher together. When I saw that emerge, both at Burning Man and in the most successful teams during the pandemic. And the question is, how do we build that?
You just mentioned that. I was listening to an interview yesterday, and I heard this line, and it was, "You're in trouble, brother. I'm in trouble." And it's like so true, right? It's like when we're forged together and going through those tough times, it's like those great teams that have bonded, they really do step up there.
But it does require a social contract shift, because most of us are in a world where survival is not at stake. We are taking care of ourselves. We show up as tribes of one. And we need to build the team. And then that team needs to make a conscious, like I said at the beginning, when I walk into a team, my job is to get them to make a conscious recognition that we need to shift our social contract. We used to have a social contract. We used to talk behind each other's backs. We used to maximize for our own performance. We used to hoard resources because we thought we need them, and when another person is in need of them. And all of that is a great leadership if you can shift that social contract.
How hard is that to shift?
Well, there's one of the things I've studied over the years is high performing groups that may not be business groups. So I've studied AA. And what I found in AA was some wonderful wisdom on how people come together to literally take each other out of the gutter and lift each other up to a rejuvenated, place in society. And there's a wonderful phrase that says, you don't think your way to a new way of acting. You act your way to a new way of thinking. You don't think your way to a new way of acting, you act your way to a new way of thinking. So to change a social contract, it's not about it, yeah, you can talk about it. The mindset is a conversation. The culture is a conversation. But I've been in so many organizations where they have these cultural norms that are on the wall, and they're bullshit, right? They're just bullshit. First thing I always do is I pull up people's cultural norms and I do an anonymous survey by each one, scale of 0 to 5, on this cultural norm. Do we actually practice it or not? And you just see the hypocrisy of it. So talking about shit is useless. Practicing is what matters. So what I instantly do is I start introducing new practices to the team, and the practice creates the social contract. So for instance, I saw Unilever in the pandemic deciding to crowdsource growth opportunities. I saw IT organizations crowdsourcing technology risk. And what they did was they called their people together and they said, all right, everybody, in the next 6 months, what's going to bite us in the ass? Right? Or in the next week, some of these instances, like when I was coaching Delta Airlines team going into the pandemic, it was like daily, right? What do we have to worry about? We had lost 90% of our revenue. What the hell? So you ask a large group of people, what are the risks? Go into breakout rooms, right? Push a button, everybody goes into a breakout room, everybody opens a Google Doc, and you start writing, what are the risks? Come back into the room, collect that information. Now, if you had done that in a meeting, in a meeting without a breakout room, you would have heard crickets or a couple of ideas. The simple act of going to a breakout room increases psychological safety. And with the open Google Doc, it squeezes the insight and makes the organization much more inclusive of getting the answers to the questions. So in a hybrid world, we can fundamentally reboot the innovation and the inclusiveness and the bold ideas that come in that we were able to do before. And I saw that. And that's there's a chapter in the book. It's the second chapter in the book. It's all about how do you embrace radical innovation through inclusion and collaboration in ways we've never thought of before.
No, I love that. One of the things you're hitting on there is just being able to see around corners, plan for the future. You had a great chapter on active foresight there, which I love that concept and that term. The way I always picture this is like, as a leader, you got to zoom out, right? And then you got to zoom in on those details. I am wondering, because one of the things I struggle with is how do you balance that? I know there's no perfect answer here, but like thinking about the future, planning ahead, but then getting done the work that needs to get done today.
Yeah. So, once again, I think that foresight, looking around corners, shouldn't be the purveyance of a single leader. It should be crowdsourced. And that's what we saw. So the example in the book, in the chapter called Foresight, the example in the book came from a gentleman named Rick Ambrose. There were so many organizations that had operations in China that on March 13th in the United States were caught on their heels like every other company. What the hell? Yet Rick Ambrose, who he was the president of a division of Lockheed Aerospace that didn't have operations in China, yet he went fully virtual in February, because in December, he always held space on his executive team meeting for the group to weigh in on where risk was, where opportunities were. He allocated to different members of his team different lenses to look at that and to curate that. And it was brilliant because somebody saw a blog about this virus in China that raised their hand. They decided that they put it into an assessment meeting, separate meeting offline, come back in January, and they realized the writing was on the wall, and they went fully virtual in February. I mean, that's extraordinary. So imagine if you crowdsource growth, potential and opportunity, and you crowdsource risk more readily on an ongoing basis. What a simple, elegant process to always be looking around corners. So that's the kind of thing. Look, in the crisis, we were all practicing what I call crisis agile. We were more attentive to information because it was changing so quickly. We weren't just heads down getting our jobs done. We were always looking around. What's next? What's next? I want us always to be doing that, right? And then we'd assess it quickly. And then we'd act on it quickly, and we'd pivot as needed. We did that constantly. Why lose that muscle memory, right? And so there's two chapters in the book, one around foresight and the other one around agility, that really show how do you bring that sustainable process into your teams.
One of the interesting things that just seems to be popping up here is around insights. But what I'm intrigued most about is these insights, they're coming from different places, right? Like you mentioned going to Burning Man and having this almost like, okay, aha type moment, and then even tapping in to the collective resource of the team. I don't know, is this something you've always done, or did the way you started to change during the pandemic?
No, I learned a lot during the pandemic. Well, first of all, yes, I've always done this to some extent. I've recognized, if you look at my very first book, Never Eat Alone, Never Eat Alone made people recognize that your life and the doors that are open in your life happen through cultivating a broad and a rich network, right? So I've always recognized that broad networks, statistically speaking, it's not the depth of a network that defines your success, it's the breadth. Because no matter where you go and however you pivot, the ability to open multiple doors at some level is very important. If you're just deep in one area of your network, you're at risk with where we're shifting landscapes, right? You're at risk. So I realized that back then. And then when I started coaching teams, I realized that I needed to teach the team to what I call team out. The team needs to not look at itself as a team of people who report to somebody. The team has to think of themselves as, who is it that we need to get the job done? Now that becomes my team. Forget an org chart. It's useless. I have no reverence for org charts. I'm working across silos or outside of organizations. I mean, it was so funny. I don't know if you know Peter Diamandis. Mm-hmm. Peter's one of my best friends for years, but he and I teamed up big time during the pandemic in so many different ways. And it was so easy. I don't know why we didn't do it in the past. We could have, but we always had hybrid engagement like we're doing right here. We always had this availability to us, and we didn't take advantage of it.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Peter Diamandis. I know someone else who's in the little triangle of the three of you is Tony Robbins. It was like the three of you all actively played offense during that time, where so many people sat
with
back
each other. Yeah, with each other. Like we're all partners and invested in companies together over the holidays. And it was interesting. Like you literally, and we did it asynchronously. Like Tony's a pretty busy guy, but between me, Tony, and Peter, we're constantly voice texting each other. So we're basically having a running meeting with each other all the time. It doesn't have to be scheduled on anyone's calendar. That was another big thing we learned, that there were myths in the way we worked that need to be rebooted. One of the myths in the way we worked was we used to think that collaboration started with a meeting. So if I wanted to collaborate with Tony and Peter on Peter and Tony's company, whether it's Fountain Life or Vaccinity or one of the companies they have, we wanted to partner together, let's get a meeting. No, let's just start an asynchronous dialogue. And we were able to achieve so much in this running asynchronous meaning not at the same place at the same time, right? But remotely. And it was amazing how much we could collaborate on so many different things. In fact, they just launched their book. Their book hit #1. They're helping promote my book. And we didn't have to have a meeting about that. We've been doing this asynchronously.
So how do you do that as part of a collaborative team? I'm just thinking about that asynchronous communication, and what does that look like?
So many different ways. Of course, you've got tools like the one we're in right here. One of the ones I've really enjoyed is a company called Mural, which is a whiteboarding company. It was the way it was started, but really it's a space to hold space for rich collaboration, asynchronous and synchronous, and Slack and Teams and those kind of things. But I'll tell you it's the intention. So for instance, instead of hosting a meeting, so let's say you're falling behind in manufacturing and inventory, right? It's like, supply chain issues, et cetera. The head of manufacturing for your team would put up what I call a decision board. It's an asynchronous Google Doc or a SharePoint document. And it basically allows the person to write, okay, here's the problem. We're falling behind in manufacturing. Here's a potential solution. Here's some of the risks associated with that solution. And I'm sending this out to these 12 people. So the 12 people get it and they look at that, and then they write with their names next to it, they write their points of view. Well, I don't know if that's the right problem. I think the right problem we should do, they debate in the cloud. And then at the end of it, they're like, well, I think so-and-so should be involved. So now instead of calling a meeting with 12 people, you've got 35 people involved in this conversation. And then the originator looks at the document and says, okay, this is interesting. Well, there's some ideas here that are emerging that are very powerful. Let's have a meeting now to land the plane. But there's only 6 people that I need to be in there. And what we generally find is the 6 people who should be in there weren't the original 12. Maybe 2 of the original 12 need to be in there. But the other ones are coming L2s and L3s down into the organization or out into a different team. And it's so elegant. Anyway, go on.
No. This is very insightful. A lot of the active takeaways here. I am wondering.
And by the way, all of these we captured in the book. What we're trying to do for you as a viewer is there are 2,000 people that have been brilliant with their various insights, but nobody had it all conquered. We crowdsource these insights and innovations for leading in this radically adaptable world that we live in today. And with that, we put it all into this methodology and into this one book. So yeah, I'm really excited to get it into people's hands.
Keith, I know we'll have this linked up in the show notes. Can you actually highlight what you guys are doing with the video series? Because this is awesome. I wish more authors did what you guys are doing with this.
Yeah, I don't see why they don't. I mean, Keon and I, my co-author, I have two co-authors. One's the real writer, Noel, and then Keon, who used to work for Peter Diamandis, running his insights group for innovative companies. The two of us just sat down one night and said, okay, look, if somebody just read the book and then they said, for every chapter, what is the biggest takeaway that somebody could start with right now? What would that be? And that's what we did. We just did a 10-minute video for every chapter. What would the biggest takeaway that you would start acting on right now be around that? And so the idea is you can either just do the video series as a cliff notes of the book, or you could do the video series as a learning journey with your team. So get your whole team the book, right? And that's one of the things, I think it's even on there. If you want to get your whole team the book and let us know that you're getting your whole team the book and using the video series with your team as a learning thing, one of my coaches will jump on the phone with you and give you a little coaching on how to do that. So swear to God, we really just want this to be extraordinarily successful for you and for you to see what's just happened, not as this disruptive thing that we got to crawl out of and go back to work, but we want you to leap forward. We want you to go forward to work, not back to work. That's been the mantra we have. We want to give you the tools to do that.
Yeah, Keith, what I appreciate so much about this is so many books you read it and it's like, oh, that was an interesting insight. It's like, are you acting on it, right? Like you talk about you got to lead action.
I don't believe in insights. I believe in action. Everything's about action. Everything I've always done. So if you go from my very first book to every one of my books, it's all full of very practical tips. In fact, we've gone in our research institute does what we call high return practices. What we do is we go and we gather executives and leaders and entrepreneurs, and we look at what they're doing. We're like, ooh, that looks like a best practice. That's interesting. And then we take that and we bring that executive into a small roundtable, and a group of that person's peers, her peers would what we call bulletproof the best practice, stress test it, pull it apart, amend it, augment it, make it more adaptable, but make it really clear, right? Boom. Now we have a well-polished best practice. Then we take that and we insert it into a team, and we insert it into multiple teams. We had over 300 teams involved in this kind of research. We insert it into the team, and then the team, then we measure both on outcomes and on a diagnostic tool whether that practice was effective. If we can measure success, then it becomes what we call a high return practice. So the things that are in the book are only the high return practices that are quantifiable.
Oh, that's fantastic. One of the things that seems to be coming out here is you seem to be a courageous person, right? You even mentioned like taking action, trying these different things, being adaptable. How has courage just gotten built up for you over the years? Because I'm wondering, right? Like you talk about being and having a resilient organization.
Look, for me, it's fear, right? I recently did a meditative story, which I'm really proud of. Maybe you can send it out to your folks. It was a story. It's called Meditative Stories. It was produced by a team called, anyway, Meditative Stories. You can see them online. Adam Grant did one. I did one. Ariana Huffington, Reid Hoffman. So it's basically these stories where you come online and we tell you a backstory, but it's to music and you meditate and fall asleep to it. It's the only time I ever invite people to fall asleep to my speaking. And for me, it was born from scarcity, fear, insecurity. I mean, I grew up in a struggling household, and there was fear and anger and financial insecurity. We didn't have enough money to get get in town, to Pittsburgh. I mean, it was bad. And I just never wanted to be there again. Right. I wanted to run away as far as I could, as fast as I could. And that fear created, it was very interesting. Years ago, when I don't even think he was the Donald yet. I sat next to Donald Trump at the Forbes mansion. I think I was the chief marketing officer of Starwood, maybe at the time. And I sat next to him at a dinner. and we were just talking about things, and little backstory conversation. And he said something incredibly insightful, which I've always remembered, whether you like him or not. It was a powerful comment. He goes, "Listen," I said, "Keith, your insecurity fed your success. I mean, that was the fuel to your engine." He said the greatest people have deep insecurity. I don't think he's as humble to say that these days, but that wisdom I've always appreciated, and it's true. Now, the question is, there's another friend of mine wrote a book that always reminds me of this. It's like, what got you here is not going to get you there. And what we need to realize is that the insecurities of our past that or whatever it is that made up who we are today, we've always got to ask ourselves with foresight and with agility, where are we going next? Who do we need to be next? And one of the things I do with executive teams is I engineer what I call behavioral engineering. How does an executive team engineer its behavior to go where it needs to go next? But you do that for yourself too. Each of us need to be behaviorally engineering. What behaviors don't serve us anymore? Where do we need to go next? And I still have lots of them. I got a spanking yesterday from one of my business partners about a behavior that I have that's not serving me, but it's, it served me so well for so long, and I know I still need to get rid of it.
Yeah, Keith, well, I'm wondering, I mean, you work with so many executives, you're the expert on this. What should that look like, that personal growth journey for individuals? How should they be approaching that?
So first of all, you need to approach it with a lot of humility, and you need to approach it with a recognition that, as I say to my executives, I said, you have to recognize you're only 50% as good as you should be. If you soak that in, you're only 50% as good as you should be. Because if you recognize there's that much difference between where you are and where you should be, then you'll be a seeker. I'm a seeker. I've always been a seeker, because I've been desiring of constantly growing and changing and morphing and dynamic. Now, how do you do that? Like, gosh, I've been on a journey. I use spirituality. I always feel that I will try anything that will ground me more or raise me higher. I will try. Yeah. And, people like Ty Lopez talk about how powerful books are, of course, the wisdom of so many people is available at your fingertips. Like the wisdom of 2,000 executives is available in that book. I mean, that's crazy. That's crazy. So books, of course, but, going to, I found Date with Destiny with Tony, it was a beautiful shift, landmark for him. It was a beautiful shift for me. The Vipassana meditation, sitting for 10 days in silence, learning meditation, plant medicine, doing an ayahuasca journey in Costa Rica, where I really went deep and saw so much of my deeply rooted fears and insecurities in my brain. With that chemical makeup of that plant, started rewiring some of the fears and insecurities. There's a lot of studies being done around what psychedelics do for mental rewiring today. And I think we're going to have increasing wormholes. Like, nothing's better than deep meditation, but there's a little wormhole that you can accompany that with, which is the use of a medicine journey for 4 hours, in the jungles of Peru, that does it pretty well too. So that's, we all need to be constantly seeking, just like I do for my body. I do hot yoga, Soul Cycle, Barry's Boot Camp, which I've been one of their oldest customers since 1998. Plus my own trainer, my own meditation. I mean, we've got to be constantly tuning this machine.
This is such a critical insight. I hope people don't miss that, right? Like, you need to be a seeker. You need to experiment. You need to try. You need to get out there on the fringes. That's one of the things I admire so much about your work, right? Like, you were even starting to see some of these insights pre-COVID. And then you were able to capitalize and like really go where the puck is going once that landed. I'm wondering for you, like, what are you seeing now? Where are Keith's spidey sense starting to, tickle a little bit and thinking about what's going to happen here moving forward as well?
Well, I've got 3 books in development right now. 3 new books.
Wait, how do you go from 8 years between them to now? What is it going to be? 3-ish in the next 2+ years?
You're good with your wisdom in terms of the knowledge. You're right. I was about 8 years in between my books. And between Never Eat Alone, Who's Got Your Back, and Leading Without Authority. That was about the cadence. Bottom line is this: I never wanted to put something out there that I didn't think that I needed to share. I would not just crank out. I knew I had friends who used to crank out a book a year. I'm like, how the fuck do you crank out a book a year? Like, what do you have to say? What do you have to say worthy of filling a book in 1 year? So I used to love going on these learning journeys. So my first book, Never Eat Alone, it took me 35 years to write that, right? Because that's your first book always takes a lifetime to write it. And then Who's Got Your Back was 8 years of research about not on peripheral network relationships, but how do you go deep in a handful of people that really have your back? What does that look like? What does it mean? Then Leading Without Authority was the belief that we're now living in networks of people. Productivity happens in networks. So how do you lead in networks? How do you lead without the authority assigned to you or given to you? And then what happened was I finally realized that while I've been researching, my research institute has been relatively small, a few people in it, and it was, these longer term projects. What I learned is how to crowdsource insights. So, I learned as much reading the purpose chapter in my own book, because it was written by Hubert Joly, the former CEO of Best Buy.
Yeah, he's been on the show. Hubert's great. Yeah.
Susan Sobot, who is the former president of American Express. The two of them, all about purpose, along with some folks over at Salesforce.com, which is a very purpose-driven organization. I let them have at the research, right? I provided a researcher, I provided a writer, and I provided three brilliant community leaders who were my faculty of the Research Institute. And they went at it. And then I would just get blessed with periodically checking in, like, that's interesting. And I would ask the questions that the reader would ask. That doesn't, I appreciate what you're saying, but how would I do that? Like, show me practically. That doesn't fall right. It's like, so I was a symphony conductor for this work. Some of them, like the chapter on collaboration and inclusion, that was all me. I mean, like, that was all my work of 20 years of cultivating high-performing teams and doing that. And I loved writing that chapter. And I worked with, a couple of researchers and stuff, but that chapter was me. But some of these chapters I learned from. So that's how now I'm sitting back and I'm like, wow, what am I curious about? Right. And that's my next 3 book projects. And I've got co-write. The other thing is co-writers like Keon. I wouldn't have been able to write this book if it wasn't for Keon. Keon basically, quarterbacked the second half of the book because he's so brilliant about business model transformation. He's basically a mini Peter Diamandis. Business model transformation, workforce transformation, et cetera. So in looking at all this, it was partnerships. And now I've literally got 3 major research projects going on with multiple faculty members, multiple partners, multiple writers. I'm having the time of my fucking life. I mean, it's amazing.
Do you have any idea who the basketball player Shane Battier is?
I don't.
So he was a pretty good player in the NBA, like 15 plus years. There's this great article on him that he essentially, they broke down all the data. He was the best teammate you possibly could have had in the NBA because the amount of support. I'm telling this story because the amount of humility you express there as a leader, the number of people who were part of this process for you. I hear so many authors that, no, this was my book, my idea. And there's so many people that contribute to that. I just want to highlight that because I love seeing that ooze out of you. I think that is so cool, so important. One thing you hit on there for a second, I want to dive into real quick as we wrap up, is you mentioned those next 3 books. You're like, I'm curious about this stuff. Is that the thing you're going after? What sparks curiosity in Keith? Or are there other factors you're looking to first?
Wait, are you saying, what's the question? What precipitated the topics of each? Or are you saying is most of my focus books these days?
No, is most of your focus going after what's piquing your curiosity?
Well, first of all, it always has. I'm just, how do I say it? I'm just rich enough now that I can do it with it. It's like, I literally can source the resources for these things, right? So I have that ability. In the past, I was, scrapping to self-fund and those kind of things. So number 1 is that. Number 2 is, no, I mean, I still have a really deep, heartfelt need to transform the most important organizations in the world, right? The Deltas, the General Motors, the IBMs, the Hewlett Packards. I mean, I really feel deeply about those Intels. I feel so deeply about that because they still employ hundreds and thousands of millions of people that from my perspective, I want to make sure that those families survive and thrive, right? Let's go back to that early days for me. But what I've really started getting more invested in are the unicorns, because I am deeply committed to cracking the code. These companies are breaking business models left and right. They're reinventing business models. And there were people like Tony Hsieh who reinvented business models and reinvented ways to think about humans and human capital. And so I'm now spending a lot of time cultivating unicorns and soonicorns to work with them to make sure that we reinvent the human capital model alongside the business models. That I'm most excited about. I'm doing that in my foundation in thetonyshiehaward.com, which anybody can go and participate in with me. If you go to thetonyshiehaward.com, it's really an invitation for any of you to co-create with us in cracking the code of human capital in the workplace.
Once again, Keith, just super crystal clear on your purpose, creating those ripples out there in the world and the mark you want to leave out there. Two more quick ones here before we wrap up. I would love to know, I mean, a lot of people hear this, wow, youngest CMO in Fortune 500. You must have been incredibly talented back then. I'm wondering, looking back, what do you like? Man, I wish you would just double down on at that point in time that took you.
First of all, I don't know how talented I was, but I did understand the power of relationships and the power of mentorship. And having the CEO of the company as my mentor gave me that permission. And I had to catch up with the title to earn it, to be honest. But look, what I wish I knew back then is the power of partnership. I was married twice before today, and one was a civil ceremony at Burning Man. But nonetheless, I had two long-term relationships of 10 years each. And I don't think until more recently that I really understand partnership. I'm in a beautiful relationship today, with a real partner. And I also feel like it's only been in the last few years that I really understood partnership in my own organization. And I'm still learning, because it's, when you're scarcity oriented and you're scrapping for survival in your life, you don't think much about partnership. You should think about, rugged individualism, getting the job done, et cetera. It's all on me. That's not a way to live your life. Living your life in partnership. I wish I had learned that earlier on, but my mindset just wasn't there. It just really wasn't. I mean, I was still that kid scared that I wouldn't be able to pay the rent like I was. I went to Yale University, and there were summers where I lived in my Volkswagen GTI while I was working in the summer, because I couldn't afford to live in the city that I was working in. I mean, that's crazy stuff. So that kind of scarcity mindset, it takes a while to dig out of that.
Keith, one of the things I appreciate so much is getting to learn from you, with the conversations like this. I'm wondering if you could do this long form conversation, anyone dead or alive, who would you love just sitting down with and just getting to explore different topics with?
Well, you know what I have to say, I've been really blessed with pretty much, anybody I really had that. If I were to name a name, pretty much I would be able to have that, right? CEOs, country leaders, et cetera. To me, to me, I still deeply enjoy having these conversations richly with the people who are moving and shaking and creating. Like the unicorn CEOs I love. I haven't, in my neighbor here in Los Angeles is Disney. I haven't had much chance to meet with the new CEO of Disney. That would be an interesting, and it'll happen. I want to have those kind of conversations. I want to help serve people who are serving the world and their employees. So it could be any of those.
That's awesome.
I think Cher would be fun to have a conversation with. She's gone through an interesting life.
So Keith, the new book is out, Competing in the New World of Work, How Radical Adaptability Separates the Best from the Rest. Anything else you want to leave the listeners with? I know we're going to have everything linked up in the show notes where they can purchase it, and then also check out the video series.
Join. I mean, you're going to love the video series. That'll really help you get a jump start on this. Just get started today. And do me a favor. If you get the book now, we're really pushing for the New York Times list. We'd love to drive that again. So put a review on Amazon would be super as you get the book. That'd be nice. Thank you. And, share the share the insights with your friend. And Sean, thank you so much. I really appreciated the time, and you really got me to a nice. I've been doing it since 5 o'clock this morning today, and I really have to say I've settled in. You have a nice. I love the principle of this podcast. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
There with Sean Delaney, got you there.
And I want to thank you for watching another powerful episode of the What Got You There podcast. We drop new episodes every single Sunday. So if you subscribe to the page, you'll be the first one to see these powerful episodes. Remember, we deconstruct world-class performers to understand their strategy, tactics, and the routines they've used to help them become world-class in what they do. So if you want to understand and then implement these into your own life, you're going to want to subscribe to the page. Remember, we also put out a weekly newsletter called Momentum Monday, which is just a quick synthesis of everything I've been reading, listening to, and watching behind the scenes. You can stay up to date and follow everything we're doing at whatgotyouthere.com.
Got you there with Sean Delaney, got you there.